Well, I think certainly in Japan, you know, the fact that PlayStation got Final Fantasy was a huge thing. You know, at the time they only had like Jumping Flash and Tekken and Ridge Racer, which were kind of like action games, but they weren't like big brands like the kind of stuff that you got on Nintendo. But I think Final Fantasy was definitely one of the titles that made everybody in Japan go, okay, we're all jumping ship, you know.
Previous to your particular interest in Final Fantasy, were you an RPG fan before that?
Not hugely, you know, I was never like, I didn't kind of graduate from playing Games Workshop, sort of pen and paper, you know, paper and dice things, you know, I wasn't like an RPG fan, but I've been a fan of, you know, the best video games, say, and I've always known that the Final Fantasy games are the best, so you have to basically pay attention. Console RPGs are just very different to even PC RPGs, and they still are, you know, say Elder Scrolls or something like that is very different to how Final Fantasy is, which is basically the template for practically every other console RPG. Your characters all start off and they're fighting with a basic dagger and they look pretty sort of like nothing, but the more you use them, the more they learn these amazing magic attacks, which is not just like a storybook thing, it's actually graphically amazing. And I think that's one of the things that Final Fantasy got right even from the beginning. You feel more powerful as you spend time with it, kind of thing. Because you spend time with the characters in Final Fantasy, as they grow in more power, you feel more powerful and a bit cool, you know, because you spent time developing them. Well, 3, I mean, the first time I played 3 is with the re-release on the DS. I was slightly worried that the story might be a bit kind of basic, but it's quite surprising to find that there's still fairly shocking events in 3, you know, for what is basically quite a twee set of characters. They're all little events that sort of tug at your heartstrings a little bit, because you get to know the characters and then somebody close to them gets sort of bumped off. Yeah. And you think, oh God, you know, I was actually quite getting to like these, you know. I think that people expect video games to basically not go near relationships between characters or anything like that. But in the Final Fantasy games, they're not afraid of creating relationships between them, and quite a lot of people just think, God, I can't be bothered with this, you know, just give me a gun. Another thing that's kind of a little bit strange about Final Fantasy is, like, say, with Star Wars, the big sci-fi movies or the big movie franchises, that you stay with the same characters, but Final Fantasy just like, dumps them all and like it brings like a whole new cast and a whole new scenario.
Do you think it's still there in the 12th incarnation, in a sense, that same style, even though the characters are different?
The big thing that they've changed with 12 is what they've kind of borrowed from 11, which is the fighting system, and it's no longer a kind of random encounter thing, so you can see who you're going to fight before you fight them. And possibly this is one of the reasons why a lot of people still sit on the fence with RPGs, is because if you're going to be having a fight with somebody, you like to see it coming rather than walking up a flight of stairs and suddenly the screen rotates and you're fighting a bunch of armed guards or something. That's another thing that I guess, you know, they're not easy to get into. There's no instant gratification with like the Final Fantasy things, you know, you have to spend time with it to get the rewards, really. If you just switch it on and you expect it to give you a snapshot of why this game is so great, you don't get that until 10 hours or so into the game, when your characters have all got great lightning attacks and you're summoning beasts and people are getting killed.
What would you say was the best Final Fantasy title with retrospect to its timing and what it kind of meant, or the most important?
The most important Final Fantasy title is 7, without a doubt. Even the guys, you know, even Squaresoft would say that. It basically summed up everything that's great about the series, you know. It's the most dramatic, it had the coolest characters, you know, it was the right balance of kind of sweet and edgy. Yeah. So, you know, it wasn't just like for lads, you know, the girls could kind of get into it as well. You know, 7 had a really vicious bad guy, and the main character had real kind of angsty problems, you know, it's kind of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or something like that, you know, so definitely 7. There's very few major sort of brands in video games, you know, maybe Tomb Raider's one of them and Street Fighter was one of them, but Final Fantasy, basically Square Enix can go where they want with it, you know. It basically, everybody wants it, everybody would want that, you know, Microsoft would want it on their console, Nintendo would certainly want it all back, but it's one of those things Square Enix can call the shots with what they do with Final Fantasy because it's big enough to do that.
And call the shots they have, including re-releasing Final Fantasy III on the DS. Definitely a good move. As you've just seen, the Final Fantasy series is a much loved one, so this remake of Final Fantasy III for the Nintendo DS is one that's been eagerly awaited. It's even more significant because it's the only Final Fantasy title that hasn't until now been officially released for a UK audience. The story itself allows you to fully customise your team of 4 fighters and sees you trying to restore the balance of light and darkness to the world. Now, for a game that's 20 years old, the story is surprisingly full of depth, and Square Enix haven't taken an easy way out with this title. They could have easily re-released a title that first saw light in 1990, dated graphics and all, and stated that that's what the fans wanted. This though, in my opinion, would have been a cheap way out. Rather than do that, the team behind the title have rebuilt the game from the ground up, complete with cinematic cutscenes and 3D graphics. This was a pretty good move, because rather than alienate the now mainstream Final Fantasy audience, they've included them by delivering a title that suits its 2007 tag. Gameplay-wise, Final Fantasy III brought a number of things to the genre that have now become mainstream staples. Things like the job system allowing you to fully customise your party were first introduced through this title and are now seen in many other RPGs. Imitation is the highest form of flattery, I guess. Stupid Dominic Diamond always copying me all the time. The remake also makes limited use of the DS's touchscreen stylus, which in-game feels a little bit like an add-on just because it's a game on the DS, however is more appropriate when used on the menu screens. Final Fantasy III is a classic RPG in every sense of the word. The graphics are top draw and are enveloped by a story full of character and depth. The highest praise I can dish out here is just to tell you that it is a game I want to play, not just in comparison to other DS titles, but ahead of any other titles. Stupid Dominic Diamond.